Anyway, thank you. I'd like to introduce Dr. Ens, who's here to talk a little bit about PowerPoint presentations and presentations in general. And this is the group, and everybody's got their name tagged.
Yeah, that's awesome. And it's actually, where'd my mouse go? The introduction is actually part of the PowerPoint presentation, so can you all hear me okay? Okay. And, oops. All right, so some of this I'm sure you will already know, and some of it hopefully you won't, and it'll make you think. I'm happy to be back here talking about this, introducing a little bit about myself, just in case you have the urge down the road to become an educator yourself, if you aren't already. I started off my sort of post-secondary learning journey working with adults, and a lot of them were injured on the job or through a motor vehicle accident, and so we did adult training basically, which you could do with an undergraduate degree. I didn't need to have special teacher training to do that. Did that for about 10 years, realized I would really like to know if I was making a difference in these adults' lives, so went to do my master's in education, and from there started working at the Learning Assistance Center at the other campus, which is now called the Academic Learning Center. And there I was able to work with learners across the disciplines, and from the first learners coming to university campus all the way up to faculty. So that was really fascinating. And then went from there to do my PhD in education, and found myself after my PhD without a job because it was in rhetoric and writing, and there aren't a lot of positions in Winnipeg, but my family's here. So, education is one of those things that you can do wherever, and because I had such a kind of diverse experience in my both work and in my degrees, I found a job with family medicine, which really quickly got moved to the office. Back then it was medical education. Now it's the Office of Educational and Faculty Development, which is serving all Rady Faculty of Health Sciences colleges, including medicine. So I've been a generalist all my life. I'm a super generalist now. And sometimes it's terrifying, and sometimes it's exhilarating because, like any doctor on this planet, there's always a lot you don't know, and the further that you get along, the more you realize the more you know, the more you don't know. So that's, in very short, my journey to getting where I am today talking to you about oral and poster presentations. So thanks for having me here, and I'm looking forward to lots of engagement during the session. Also, I have frozen shoulder, so if you see me being weird, I'm normally right-handed, but I'm now a lefty, so and it also inhibits some of the way I teach. So by the end of the session, you'll be able to list basic principles of good oral presentation and poster design and explain key points involved in communicating the message. I think a lot of the times we talk about creating posters and oral presentations, and we focus on the details of how long should it be, or what colors should you use, or what font size, etc. And we forget that the most important thing is the message that you're communicating. So as you're working on your projects, which you're doing again this year, right? How far along are you into them?
I think we'll be, but we haven't started yet.
Ooh, so I'm in a way different spot in the curriculum this year, okay? Okay, so that's good. Keep this in mind as you drag yourself forward, or as you hurdle yourself forward, whichever it ends up being. And so then after the session, it's hoped you will be able to apply design concepts to your pre-session questions, which were in if you had a chance to read the worksheet, were in there, and will really focus your thinking about how you want to do your presentations. So to warm up your brains, we're going to do an activity, and so your directions are, you are to offer advice to content experts on improving their presentations. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you 3 different presentations that I got from a Dalhousie or a McMaster site, I can't remember which, and you're going to be not offering advice on what was in it, but on how it was presented. And you're going to do that just by eyeballing it really quickly. So what's your initial impression, and then what are the most striking points for or against? And I've got them loaded here, so. Okay, let's start with this one. Okay, so first impressions and just some thoughts. Don't tell me yet, just some thoughts that you have of strengths, weaknesses. Really, you don't have to read it all, you're just like skimming here.
You could read it all.
You could read it all?
You couldn't read it all.
Oh, okay, all right. Okay, so I'm just gonna keep going here for a little bit more and then I'll get your thoughts. All right, you've got an idea already. What do you think?
I didn't like the white printing on the color and the
Okay.
one color.
Right?
That summer.
Yeah, problematic. Anything else?
I did like the initial title slide. I was like, oh, this is gonna be a well-designed presentation.
Grabby title, it's got you sucked in, right? Because that's something you want to know.
That's, yeah, exactly. That's like, oh, yes, I need to answer that question.
Great, okay. Anything else?
Initially, she had good text to white ratio, text to background ratio, and then eventually it kind of went the other way.
So lots of visuals initially with a bit of text that's guiding you, but then all of a sudden now we're getting clunky, well, a little more clunky. Okay, anything else?
There were like full sentences at the end.
Okay, full sentences. Oh, interesting. All right,
I feel like there's like a broad, like these slides are like very broad with no details, and then it's like, and then there's details rather than being like, okay, these are the things you want to refer for, here's more information about them. These are the things you defer, here's more information about them.
okay, so you're talking to the way it was organized.
Yeah.
So, and that's a little bit subjective because everybody's going to think differently about how they want to organize their information, right? So you know about the broad to narrow or the compare contrast or the sequencing, those kinds of things. But that's a good point.
Or even if you wanted to do all the broad stuff up front, to then kind of be like, okay, here's what we're going to refer for.
Right.
And then more info, because it just kind of jumps into all the info.
Okay, yeah.
What is this about?
So some good points. Anything else on that? Well, this is a warm-up, so I should probably not exhaust the whole thing on this. All right, so then, this is where, so sorry about that. Let's look at this one. Okay, so again, oops. Okay, sorry, there's that.
This exact one.
No.
Have you seen this?
No.
Oh, okay.
I mean, go now, but it feels like.
There's a lot of images that are sourced or you know where they're from.
Okay.
I
Right.
hate the background.
Well,
So-
yeah. This
So
usually is not made
that's
for anyone to see it.
It seems very, well, like other than the background and stuff, the fonts change, there's like hearts sometimes, all Comic Sans, or mostly Comic Sans, which I know is not
It feels a little kindergarten, right? Yeah, which, you know, okay, so you're in peds, so maybe depending on your audience, I don't know if you're talking to parents, maybe that, but even then, like it doesn't feel very, it kind of detracts from the gravity of the content, right? Okay, so any other thoughts?
I think that the pictures, although they weren't sourced, we're talking about a very visual subject, and I think describing to placement in words is difficult.
So were any of these helpful?
Yeah.
Okay, so you could follow along, especially if the presenter were narrating as you went along, right? And so what about this one here? What do you think about that?
Not really know.
I'm
I'm not really sure what that's doing.
Okay, trying to bring the human into it? I have no idea either. Okay, okay, so that's some good comments. Anything else on this one? Did I hear background in the beginning? Distracting or helpful? Okay, great. And then the final one, you're just illustrating to me that, you know, you probably don't need this workshop. Okay. And then the final one. So,
I liked objective slide, kind of laying a ground rules, right?
That's a lot of
Oh.
reading.
That's a lot of text.
With however's in there for us.
The thing though, just as a side, in my opinion, with, I get that people don't like a lot of writing, but if that slide was up there for 5-10 minutes and someone was talking through all the points, it's actually not a lot. As long as you can visually see it and read it, I think.
To me, that just seems like it was a paragraph and they just, at the end of every sentence, just clicked
Yeah.
enter.
That
Yeah.
should be what they're saying, not what they're writing.
I'm guessing that the person was probably reading it off the slide.
Oh, and that's a totally
right?
different kettle of fish.
Right.
Like, that's what I'm saying is if you had 5 main takeaways, I'm
Yeah.
not talking about this specifically.
This
We have 5
particular
main
slide.
takeaways, and you
Yeah.
have them out.
Yeah.
I'd rather you actually get that when you get your printout of a form than have one word things that no one knows what they're for. And you had 30 minutes to discuss those 2 slides.
In
So
the
that's the difference
context of-
between
yeah.
a good handout and a good
Good
slide.
presentation, yeah, because like if you were gonna refer to this later, I agree, I
That's
love
because
having
usually we
context.
don't get separate handouts from
I
slides when
know,
we're given
yeah.
presentations.
But like in the context of this just being a presentation.
Yes,
guess
I agree.
it's, yeah.
But it's a long-term goal of usefulness.
So here are some important things for you to think about. When you're presenting, these are great comments. When you're presenting, are you presenting to present your research and the slides are going to tell the story with you narrating? Or is this a slide deck that people are going through individually online at their own pace, in which case you want it text heavy, right? Otherwise they don't know. So if you are teaching, which you may eventually do, right? Or presenting at a conference where you might have excess text that you want people to walk away with, but you don't want to overload it visually, you can do the handout, right? Or you can do the link to your website where you have all the more information or whatever it is. But that's exactly the kind of thought you should be putting into your own presentation where you're thinking about this. I've had one person only ever say that they appreciated a lot of text on PowerPoint, and that was someone who really did better processing language versus visuals. But they've done studies on this and found that, in fact, for most learners, the retention of the information that's presented increases if you have visual plus appropriate narration. And if you have visual and text, they should be closely related. The viewers shouldn't be going, I don't really get why that text is with that visual. You shouldn't be having that question of why is that picture there? You should never have that question, right? And a lot of times as presenters, we like to put pictures in because we know it spices it up or it makes it more visually interesting. But in fact, what you could be is sending your audience down some different rabbit hole that you didn't really want them to be going down. So just, tamp down your enthusiasm for visuals and only include them if they're actually relevant. Any other ideas, though, about the presentation of this one? How did it compare to the 2 previous ones?
It's a lot more professional.
More professional?
It has
Yeah.
more consistent design.
More consistent design, right? So you're already thinking of some things that you're going to keep in mind when you're editing your own. Consistent design, professional look,
Easy to read.
easy to read.
Despite the fact that there's lots of text,
Black
at
big
least you can read the black words on the white screen.
Okay,
And
so
they're large.
So there are PowerPoint, like pre-formatted PowerPoint templates that have the white on dark background, and that works for a lot of people, but it has to be dark background. It can't be light background or it all blurs together, right? And there was another one that I think had the yellow font on whatever colored back. You can't read that, so just be really cognizant of it. And even if it looks good on your laptop, it might not look good on a
When you
big
open
screen,
another
right?
program on a different computer, it might
With
be
the light
totally
font.
shifted.
No problem.
So personal story there, I was doing my PhD dissertation defense, and I spent a lot of time with color because I knew you're supposed to think about color. So I picked calming colors, and I had this lovely green and like black text and whatever. I had another, I think like orange or something because it was complementary for my graphics, my arrows and stuff like that. And I got to the room where I was defending, and there was something wrong with the projector. So all the colors were disgusting. It was like puke had spilled out of the screen. And some other people I know would have been able to, in the moment, just quickly change the presentation format, but I was worried that all my bullets would move and like that it would all just fall apart. So I kept the ugly colors and just went with it. But my lesson in that story is that simple really is better because it's foolproof, right? And if you want to avoid the awful gut feeling of, I'm now showing everyone my baby and it's on a pukey screen, just make sure you're there well ahead of time so that you can troubleshoot like that. Great, so those were that was the warm-up. activity from slide. And you gave some great current. So what we're going to do for the rest of this session is you're going to take a pre-test. This was already kind of a pre-test. I'm getting a sense of what your background knowledge is. But from the MedEd portal, which I understand you weren't able to access before the session, that's fine. They have a whole section on how to do research in a PowerPoint presentation. And I'll send Dr. Rod the information after the session again so that you can have it if you want to do it. They have one where they have the presentation and then they have the presentation revised to reflect some of the principles of good design. So you can have a look at that and see if the improvements were really improvements. But we're going to do their pre-test, which is really what they call review, to see if you can answer their questions about good design. And that's this one. All right, so which of the following best describes the title of a presentation? Okay, so why?
You want people to know what you're going to talk about.
So that's the descriptive part, right? Okay, why no longer than 12 words? That seems sort of arbitrary.
People's attention span is short.
Yeah, you know, keep it short. People don't want to, and the number of words is relevant. Well, it is and it isn't. Acronyms are fine in the title as long as they are explained in the presentation. Could be if it's vital to what you're talking about.
And in the title said what that acronym was.
Right, so you're reading the title.
And you put NRP after whatever that.
But, you know, if you can avoid it, do technical terminology is fine since everyone will understand. What do you think of that? All right, the first slide that orients the audience to the purpose of your research is? Title? That's what I would have said. But in fact, they suggest that it's the hypothesis or research question slide. And I guess it's very similar to journal articles where, you know, you read the background and then sort of where you fill the gap with your research. So you have all this where you're painting the picture and you've got a broad subject, but then the purpose of your research comes in where you state your hypothesis or where you list your research questions. So if you look at it that way, that makes sense, right? Having in-text citations on your slides is not necessary if you have bibliography or references slide. False? Want to say more about that? It is false.
Because your bibliography does not tell you which information came from which study. So if people want to look further into, if you have a data point and then once you have to cite that so they can go find the right paper, also look through all your references.
Right. What's another reason? Copyright issues. So that'll vary depending on universities. For example, U of W has a different copyright agreement than U of M does. It'll depend on which country you're in. And so you may not all stay in Canada, right? So these are things to keep in mind. Or if you're presenting globally, just be aware of different ways of presenting your information. But there's another thing that you haven't mentioned yet, which I think is equally important. And it goes along with what you were saying, Karen, is that...
Sorry, you're also presenting likely to colleagues who might have done the research or might know people who have done the research.
So...
I'd say beyond that though too, it also legitimizes what you have on the slide if it's not yours.
Okay, so all of those
whatever I want,
things.
but if I don't have it, then...
Absolutely, all of those things. It raises your credibility, and it's sort of like offering the crumbs for Hansel and Gretel or the clues for the detective. You're letting people understand how you got to this and what you're building your particular research on, right? And so that way they can either give you credibility or say, you missed a really important researcher, I'm going to take what you say with a grain of salt, or whatever. Good. Is it appropriate to use bullet points on the method slide? Yes. Yeah? Why not? All of the results from your study must be in the presentation. Okay, why?
It'll be too much information.
Yeah. Also, what are you trying to do with, when you're presenting your research, what are you trying to do for your audience?
We're trying to
Get them
summarize.
interested.
Summarize, get them interested,
So
sell it. Which is the most applicable to your results slide? Different answers, C. Let's see what they say. Ha! All right, well, what's wrong with A? Okay, what about B? Take,
Tables should have more than one color to make them easier to read.
yes, okay, so even if you knew nothing about presentation, it has the word only there, and anytime there's an absolute, it's probably not true, right? So, and anyways, only one color, whatever, okay, see? And then D, we've already kind of addressed that with, do you have to do everything? All results on one slide would probably be overwhelming, plus you're gonna select them for your audience. So, you have illustrated to me that you already know a lot of stuff about oral presentations, and the challenge might be more for you in applying it to your own research presentation, because when you're doing your own stuff, if you're anything like me, you may leave it to the last minute, and then you end up putting it all in there because you don't have the mental energy to actually be selective about what the audience might need to hear. So if I can give you any word of advice, it's as prepare in advance, right? There are some things you can stick into your presentation when you're in the proposal stages. You already know what your research questions are, you know what your background literature is, all that stuff. Get it started so that you can have more time later to cull it down.
It seems also when you yourself have spent hours or days or months or whatever on a project, a lot of the small stuff that really doesn't matter in a presentation matters a lot to you. So
Yes.
I think you're right, like you lose sight of sometimes what's important, but you also like, you spend hours doing that one test that no one really cares about, they just want to know that you did it, you know what I
Yes,
mean? So it's
exactly.
not, like, figuring
Yeah.
out what's actually.
Yeah, I was at a presentation the other day where the person spent a lot of time showing the geography of the area where she was doing her research. And while it was interesting, because I had never heard of these places, it was in India, in one like sort of south western area of India. She could have probably cut it in half, but she was invested in it because she knew the people. She had walked there, eaten the food, smelled the dust, etc. Right? So. And the other thing that I wanted to mention there, piggybacking on that, is the flip side of it is if you start early, sometimes, and it depends on how you think. I'm a discovery writer, so my writing process is really messy. So even as I'm doing the research, there's a lot of stuff going on. Sometimes if I put it into a PowerPoint, it clarifies things for me. I tell myself, okay, just lay it out. You know what the headings are, right? What are the headings for your research oral presentation? We're not going to talk about that a lot. What are they going to be? You already know them.
hypothesis, methods, results, discussion.
Hey, we all know them, right?
Funders.
Yeah.
And you know what's fantastic about that? You already have the outline. It triggers you. It's a way of signaling to your reader. It's a prepackaged organizational format that takes cognitive load off people. If you follow it, it'll make it easier for them to follow you. So sometimes people like to make things unique and mix things up. I'd suggest for that part of it, don't bother. We want to know, just do it the way it's always done because it's easier. You can be creative within the slides and with your presentation style. So some of the principles that we saw in the pretest when we were unpacking the answers was principles of multimedia, where visually less is more. You've commented on that in the warm-up exercise and also in the pretest, so keep that in mind. Number 2, in terms of signaling, I just said use the conventions because it decreases cognitive load. And you mentioned in the one slide the person seemed to have just cut and paste from a longer like text. But those words when you're narrating, things like however, therefore, next, surprisingly, in conclusion, they really help to signal your audience person where you're headed with your narrative. So be really clear when you're thinking about what you're going to say with the slides, where you're signaling your audience. So when it gets exciting, your voice is probably going to go like this and you're getting really excited about it. And when it's not as important and you're just sort of adding it in, you're going to drop down and register and just talk in a little bit more blah blah way, right? It's those kind of things that really bring life to the presentation and help people to know what's going on in addition to the visuals. So when you're presenting with PowerPoint, your goals are to connect with your audience, to communicate your message, and to make it memorable. And to meet those goals, you're going to organize your content and use visuals to support, enhance, or communicate your message. So if you think about a PowerPoint presentation that you've seen recently that stood out in terms of excellence, can you just tell me a couple of things that helped it to stand out?
It complemented what was being presented. It wasn't itself a presentation, so it wasn't being read. It wasn't being, and it flowed in a way that made sense.
Do you think the person practiced? Or were they just really expert?
They could have been a really good presenter, but I guess they at least knew, like they knew what was coming next. They were ready and presented and set the stage for each step. So
Nice.
either they're a seasoned presenter or they definitely did.
Yeah. Anybody else? What made it memorable?
Engagement.
Okay, how did they engage you?
I paid attention the whole time.
But how? Was it the language? Was it the
Just
visuals?
how they
Was it-
presented, like they were interested in the topic, they were bored reading,
Yeah.
and they made use of like pointing to their slides and then talking, pointing and talking, so you're always kind of going back and forth.
Yeah, and our the presentation I've got today doesn't do a really good job of that. But if you look at the examples from MedEd Portal, they do a better job where they actually like have highlighted pieces of the results. It's a graph or a table, and they've circled it in red so that it really. And then I imagine the presenter saying, you know, we found all these masses of data points, but this was really the interesting piece, and then the red circle comes up, right? And so both with the vocal inflection, but also with the complementary visuals. Good. Okay, so the ideas that we've talked about and will continue to talk about actually have a theoretical base, and this is my many years of educational research and classes and whatnot. So these are all theories. They're from cognitive psychology, and the first one is information processing. Very simply, information processing has sensory information comes in, your brain does something with it, and that doing something with it is what puts it into long-term memory, and then you have to retrieve that information somehow, right? And so all of those steps, you can do things. You, the presenter, can do something about that. So if you think about encoding or the senses taking in the information, we've already talked about that. It's your tone of voice, it's what you're wearing, it's what the visuals you picked, etc. What they're going to do with it, that's where you can cue them. Ask them questions, because by asking questions, you're making them already interact with that information in a different way. Like I've been interacting with you the whole time, I could have told you everything that you told me. Who's learning if I'm telling you everything? I already know this stuff, right? By you telling me, you're hearing different voices, you're hearing your own voice, and it's inputting a different way. So that kind of interaction isn't always possible, but if you can build in questions, even when you're doing a research presentation, it's going to help. Even if they don't have to respond, plant the question. And then retrieval, that's up to them. But, you can send them along with a really interesting what's next, or, how would this affect you, or whatever. Cognitive load and multimedia both build more on that idea of good principles of design will help what the brain's doing both in the encoding and in the interaction. I forget what the technical term is for that inside the brain. So then the key points that are based on the sources I mentioned there are to be selective with content and presentation, which we've already talked about. Less is more. Notice how I've got that in red? I want to hammer that into you. Less is more, less is more. I'm hammering it in again. 2, organize content and slides, maximizing visual accessibility. Font size matters. Don't squish in more stuff. Keep it readable. If you need another slide, go ahead. You can have 450 slides, just keep it manageable. Okay, 450 was wrong, obviously, but. Tell a story. Okay, that's kind of weird, right? You're presenting research. When you go and listen to other people's research presentations, do you feel like you're listening to a story?
I think sometimes you do if it's presented in a way that's engaging. I mean, if you're just speaking in a single tone and repeat, like that's a very different experience. Even if you're talking about, I don't know, microbes doing something, it might not be my story that I can follow why it's relevant and how you talk from beginning to end. That makes sense.
Any other thoughts about the idea of a story? Have any?
If it's building on itself, like stories like take into consideration what happened previously
Yeah.
and take an idea forward.
And like
And
the
so-
context
yeah.
and like why are they researching this, and then that's kind of like what brings you in.
So those are some really key elements about why telling it as a story is going to be more engaging for your listener, right? Human beings we're
made for
we are
stories.
made for stories. And it feels funny talking about it in academia because we've worked so hard, especially in the sciences, to be objective and to be sequential and logical and organized. But that doesn't mean that we can't still bring in the logic of the story. And it doesn't mean that we can't interact with the other human beings in the room who are okay with being personable, right? They'll identify with that. It doesn't mean you're being less objective. It doesn't mean you're being less logical. It just means you're able to communicate well. And that's part of the multimedia principle, is that bringing in that personality is going to really help with the connection. It's not going to be the only thing. You can be super personable, and if you have a crappy research project, then you'll be remembered for how lovely you were, but not for your research. So here are some practical points, and I haven't made these up. These ones are taken from the MedEd portal, and they're all over the place. I'm sure they're based on experience. So you may have heard no more than 1 slide per minute, roughly 2 minutes per slide. So the no more than 1 slide per minute, these are just general rules. If you're showing, if the point of what you're showing is to, show a rapid something or another, then obviously you can do more than 1 slide, right? If you're just showing really brief glimpses of something or another. But generally, no more than 1 slide per minute. Why do you think that would be important for your viewer or listener?
I think it's more important for yourself because people get mad when you run overtime. And then
Yeah.
you check out of
Yeah.
what you're saying.
It's true.
Also to be able to process it. I'm sorry.
That's a big one.
I was going to say something similar, like a lot of the times a new slide comes up and your first instinct is to read what's on the slide, and if the presenter is, also talking at the same time about something else and then they've moved on, you kind of miss everything. It's a similar processing.
So interestingly, even though we can listen really well, like we can process words more quickly than the person is saying, well, more quickly than they're saying them, but our ability to process language is pretty high. That said, it depends what the concepts are that are being presented. And if they're very new to the listeners, there's going to be more stuff going on, and exactly what you said, Karen, that you go on to the next slide and you missed it, right? And then the second thing is, for sure, if you have too many slides, you're going to run the risk of not being able to cover them all, because frankly, when you're in front of people, you tend to take longer and speak more than you did when you rehearsed it. So if you have 60 slides for a 60-minute presentation, you're going to run over time, no question asked. Roughly 2 minutes per slide. I know for myself that that's not going to be true. Even if it's a very simple slide, I'm like, oh, I thought of another idea, right? So I have to constantly rein myself in and try and keep it and watch the clock and make sure I'm moving through it. But you can rehearse that, right? Put your bullets, read the slide, see how long it takes. And then think about those slides where you know the content is richer and deeper and you know you're going to double or triple that. And then think about those slides where you're involving the audience. Okay, now for sure triple and maybe quadruple it. And then you've got your presentation.
I was just saying, I also feel like if you're not sticking on a slide for at least 30 seconds, then what was the point of this slide?
Yeah,
Like, if you don't need to be on there for that long, then really.
The point of the slide was probably like that cognitive overload one where there was all that stuff going on and you really just want to hurt your audience and maybe send them into a seizure. Okay. So what do you want to include? You don't have this, but I can make sure you get it by email or in your Dropbox. So this is stuff that you can read on your own. I don't think we need to talk about it. You know a lot of it already. But consider your audience. So for these research presentations, you're just presenting to each other, or will there be others there as well?
I think there will be like preceptors and stuff, people who are evaluating us.
Okay, so considering your audience, if your topics are well known to each other, then what are you trying to communicate, right? Are you trying to impress these preceptors? Are you just trying to be clear, and are you really scared of public speaking and just want to make it through it? Whatever, you're going to have different goals. And again, remember less is more, visual versus textual. Use bulleted points, not sentences. You've already mentioned that. Use quality images and graphics. Hey, that's one that's so tricky. So quality images, there's a bunch of free stuff on the internet. Maybe you have your own images. I don't know. If you're doing original research, you might have like just taken your own stuff. But again, it looks good on your phone or on the laptop, and as soon as it's blown up, it's just ridiculous, right? So one of the ones, a couple of the ones
Like
that...
ripping a finger off of a paper or something like that. Blurs it for some reason.
And I don't really have a good workaround for poor images. Like, if you don't have them, I guess the best solution would be not to use them. Because a bad image is probably worse than talking it through and making people imagine it. I don't know. What do you think?
I think part of it too is, well, sometimes there's bad images, but sometimes there's things that you took a screenshot of, but if you had actually opened up in a PDF and then cut, like, there's ways to make images that are okay, stay okay, versus when we take a screen and then it gets blown up, of course it's not going to be.
So maybe use each other as a resource for that.
So like actually downloading it instead
yeah.
of taking a screen, like that makes a huge difference to the quality.
And I know on Macs, like screenshotting versus like selecting and copy paste.
So all
Which
those
one's
tips.
higher?
The screenshotting is better for me, at least. Like if I already have the PDF open, and I make it as big as I can, if I just copy, like select and copy paste, and then try to stretch it in another program, it goes distorted. But if I screenshot it, it's a JPEG, so there's more information.
There's more richness, yeah. And that's another thing when you're sizing graphics. Use the corners, right? Don't like stretch it because that's awful. Then it's then you know right away. Okay, this person doesn't know what they're doing. Okay. So some more sort of basic slide design things. You want clear, readable font, minimum 20 point, often 32 for body and 44 for heading. It's nice to know this because when you're dealing with content, you don't want to be fussing with details like that, right? So just decide and stick with it. And if all of a sudden you have too much content and your font's getting smaller, make another slide. Or decide to get rid of some of your content. You're doing something wrong there, right? So these should be sort of rules because they help you not only in the visual aspect of it, but in thinking about your content and how much do I have on the slide, is it reasonable?
Is there a way to preset that in PowerPoint? Because this is the problem I always have. It feels like I'm going through my entire presentation at like midnight, trying to like make every single font the same size. I'm like, there should be a way to do
Because it
this.
automatically, like the more
Text
more
you put
text
in.
you have, the smaller it
You
gets.
can turn that off though. I honestly can't remember this precise second I do it, but I know when I was doing my thesis, I had to turn it off because my preceptor was someone who was obsessed with the slides. It was like everything was not the exact same. But yeah, there's a way to turn it off.
I'm guessing you can Google that exact question and you'll find an answer.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't know myself. I actually go through it and just make
You
sure
can
it's
say like title will be
consistent.
this font.
But I'm a little anal that way. But if there's an easier way to do it, you should probably do the easy
There are
way.
people using the master under PowerPoint, so do a master slide, and then it sets up with each line, and it's automatically, then you can set up when your first line is on your second line, when you want to be bullet.
And you can turn off the auto reset, so like when it adds another line, you're off the slide instead of being, just making it smaller.
And where is this master?
Okay, so this is the kind of thing that would be really fun as a sort of a cheat sheet, right?
Yeah.
If any of you want to develop that and send it to me, that'd be great.
It's under view.
Oh, I see, I
It's
see.
under view.
Wow, this is so.
Or we can think about it and create it for this year or next year. It's great. Okay, so be consistent. We already talked about that throughout the presentation. It feels like fussiness, but for the viewer, it really does make a difference in terms of the flow of the presentation. So you don't want stupid things like font size to distract from your message, right? Use 2 to 3 colors. Some people love color and they go overboard, and then it's like, it's not helpful. And consult a color wheel if possible. Use white space, that was mentioned way earlier. The brain needs that white space. It doesn't help to fill it up with text because then nothing stands out. That's a principle of salience. You want things to stand out that you want them to grab, and you want them to grab easily. So don't overload the poor viewer's brain with too much information. Use relevant images sparingly and quality images, and then highlight keywords and phrases, chunk. Okay, so highlighting keywords and phrases, have you ever done this? I'm assuming you've done PowerPoint. So what color do you use?
I usually bold.
You bold it? I like bolding too. What was your experience? I've been using red. What's your experience of that so far?
It's consistently red, and so I've learned that it means something important.
Yeah, so
time.
if it's the same color, it'll help. I'm not entirely sure how I feel about red. That's what the MedEd portal suggestion was in there, so I was practicing with that. To me, it's like, you know.
Well,
And
red
also-
often signals important, but it's also like kind of
Danger.
associated with like danger.
Totally.
Then if you're
That's
colorblind or
right,
something.
yeah.
Exactly. So you have to keep in mind that there will be people in the audience who won't be able to differentiate between shades very well, and red and green are particularly problematic that way. So bold might have been better, and I will take that forward for next year.
I've also done where like you have this blue as your other color.
Yeah,
So if something was really important, I could use that color as my highlight
that could work.
color.
Or if I had,
As long as you read it easily.
most PowerPoint templates have their 2 colors that they picked, right? And unfortunately for that one presenter, it was yellow, so it didn't work for the text at all, but. Okay, so here are some examples of using that principle of using mainly visuals and then having the narration tell the story. So the before slide, there's supposedly, I don't know what this stuff means, so hopefully you know better than I do, but it's from Isa et al, and they're the ones who did some research into this and looked at whether or not learners got more out of the visual plus narration versus the visual plus the text plus narration. And there's a lot less text on the second one. What do you think?
I like the first one.
You like the first one? I've heard other people say that. Okay, why?
Because I know what it means. And now I'm like, I don't even know what that bottle says, to be honest.
Okay, so the graphics aren't very good, and they aren't when I blow it up either. And the original was in color, so that might help a little bit.
I feel like if they had stuck maybe like crystalloids, colors, and what, like sort of added maybe a little bit more text to the photos to identify what each one was, then you could understand.
So the argument in the article was that this is a complex procedure, and that if you were to do it with a just text slide, that it wasn't evocative enough for the viewer, that it was better to have the visuals where they right away knew what they were looking for, and then the procedures were described. So I don't know, like for me, it would probably make a difference as to where the learner is at in terms of understanding everything, right? If you're a beginner, you're gonna need to see the actual words, because they're not automatic in your brain yet, and you may have never seen those visuals before, right? Whereas if you were a bit more practiced and you'd had a little bit more experience with.
I feel like it partially depends too on like what slides came before, as well as like if that was our institution and those are the things we see every day.
That's kind of
Then
where I'm
that
trying to
model
get
I
at.
would just assume is what I see every day,
Right.
whereas when I look at that right now, I don't really know.
Yeah.
I know that the blood is blood,
Yeah.
but other than that, I don't know what the difference between the other two are. But when I look at the words, I know what the difference is.
Yeah.
When when I see, like, when I first saw these two slides too, like, the interstitial and intravascular at the bottom of the second slide, I was like, what is that? Like, it's not clear that the first picture goes with interstitial and the second two go with intravascular, whereas the first slide has those nice arrows, which is like helpful. And like
that's
for me,
great.
like I've seen like albumin infusion on the ward, so I kind of know that middle one would be like a colloid, because that's what
Which
albumin looks like.
Yeah, no, without reading,
But-
being able to read it, you wouldn't know what it is.
Yeah.
Like it could also be lidocaine.
I know, but like
the full
that
thing, you'd
context.
probably be able to read it. And, like, be
Right,
seeing exactly
yes.
what slide,
So
you
here's an
probably would be
example
guessing what
of-
the bottle is.
Remember we talked about getting good visuals? So I think what I did was photocopy or like scanned the article, which had the picture in it, and then cut it and made it as big as I could on my screen, and then cut and paste. It's like a crappy visual. So here's case in point, right? I wanted to give it to you because it sort of represented the principle, but it's actually not a very good example of a good graphic. So there's another one in the same article. It's a bit clearer.
Yeah. That's way different.
And that does that make more sense to you?
Yeah.
Okay, so you could see
Without
someone.
even reading it and trying to understand it, it's obvious that on the right, there's like a diagram that if you understand it will give you everything that is written down.
And I think the things that you pointed out with the earlier example are really true. If you use images, the audience needs to be able to really quickly identify what those images are and sort of the schema around them, right? So if you see an oxygen tank, what comes to mind? What do you think of when you see an oxygen tank? You can just say whatever, because I don't know very much.
Well,
What's
like
that?
sometimes it's like balloons.
Like resuscitation.
So who administers oxygen? Okay, this was probably a bad example. What I'm trying to get at is, maybe, okay, I'll pick a non-medical one. What do you think of when you see a Tim Hortons cup? Coffee and what else?
Tidbits.
Donuts, Timbits. Do you see the actual store? Do you think of Canada? Do you think of hockey? Do you think of like little kids playing hockey? You know, like.
Yeah.
So what I'm trying to get at is one image can evoke a whole schema. You can have this whole story around one thing. And so if it's an image that you know what it is and you can identify it and you've seen it often, then it's a useful one to use in your presentation. But if your people are just like, I don't know what I'm looking at, and they get all confused, then that's when it's not very useful. A process, charts are easier to follow. Okay, more on good visuals. Which ones, well, they tell you do, don't, but what's wrong with the one that says don't? It's dark, what
I
else?
can't see the lines as well
Can't see the lines.
because of the picture.
It's overpowering the graph, which I think is supposed to means what I mean.
But like, is
I was gonna
putting
say, I would
a
argue
picture
that you don't
behind
even need the
neither,
picture behind
yeah,
it,
like,
yeah.
what's the picture of the house doing? Nothing. It shouldn't be there.
Good for you. Okay, nice. All right, so telling the story, we've talked a lot about like the actual look of the PowerPoint and sort of how you choose visuals and stuff like that. This normally would be where you would tell us a little bit of the story of your research, but given that you're not really into that process yet, we'll let that be and move ahead. But when you're thinking about your story, have any of you ever watched the 3M competition? You know, Manitoba has the 3-minute thesis competition. You heard of it? So what you're supposed to do is pitch your thesis in 3 minutes. And it's a contest, and so in the first round, I think people have often won things like iPads or whatever, and then in the second round, they win something better, I don't know what. Anyways,
There's a national, like, if you win it, you go to a national competition.
pardon me?
If you win it, you go to a national competition.
I see.
At least at East you do, so I assume you must here too.
It's kind of like spelling bees, I guess. But anyway, so they're really challenging and they're really great because they force you to do all the things that we talked about today. Create an engaging story that's going to connect with a diverse audience using visuals and in a really short, like 3 minutes. That's nothing. So When you're thinking, I challenge you to do this. When you're thinking about your research, at different stages along the way, try and give your spiel to someone who doesn't know what you do, who's not in your field. You can do it to each other too, because that'll give you different information. But tell your sister, your mom, your cat, okay, your cat won't be back. Tell somebody. And if you can do it in 3 minutes, and if you can get them interested, then you're onto something. That's what you can put into your bare bones for your story. So poster presentations. Your goals are to connect with your audience, communicate your message, make it memorable. And you meet your goals by organizing your content and using visuals to support, enhance, and communicate the content. This is the same slide I put up for your PowerPoint presentation. What's different about a poster?
You do put more writing.
Sorry?
You do put more writing. You do put more writing.
I still didn't hear you. I'm so sorry.
You do put more writing.
You do put more writing in. Yes, in a poster there's more writing. Why?
One, because often people are not having you talk to them. The purpose is to give a more full picture.
Okay, so you want you'd have a full picture, and also you may not be standing by your poster all day, right? So some benefits, if you are standing there, there's a lot more interactivity, and some of the content doesn't need to be there because you can explain it in the moment. And you can individualize it to whoever's asking the question, instead of having a wide audience of 1,000 people at your important conference plenary. But if the poster is up all conference and you're not around to explain it, you do want to make sure there's enough that'll hook them, but then you can say NC X website for further information or X publication or whatever. So here's a poster. We'll just super quickly do a little bit of what we did with the PowerPoint presentations. What do you think of that?
There are some nice elements.
What do you like about it?
I like that the boxes have borders, that the headings are consistent, although they're hard to read.
I feel like I don't know exactly which way I'm supposed to go through it. Like there's a lot going on, and okay, if I start an intro, do I go down, and then once I get to the middle, which part should I be reading first?
Yeah,
I find it a bit difficult to follow, I guess.
So visually, if you see the poster as a whole, it might be important to keep some photography elements or some basic visual design elements in mind, right? So we tend to read left to right. You can use the rule of thirds up and horizontally and vertically in terms of how you want the visual weight. So blur your eyes and step back. That'll give you a sense of, okay, what's this doing? This one's really splotchy all over, right? That's probably not the most important thing in the world, but it is something that helps visually guide the reader, because you bring up an important point, which is, unlike an oral presentation where it's linear, we go from start to end, right? Now, once in a while, presenters will hop back, or they'll, whatever, oh, I forgot this part, or let's go back to the slide, but generally they're linear. Poster presentations, you enter where you will, and so your information needs to be able to guide the reader wherever they start to the important elements. So you want to cluster your important elements where people are going to land. So, go ahead.
I also say at least a third of this is pictures that don't add anything. So even if you just got rid of those pictures and made everything larger, it'd be easier to read and to follow. Or change what photos you're using where. We don't need to say picture of a kid to describe race or smoking or prone or alone back and front. Maybe, if you're going to have a picture decoratively, fine, but the whole almost half of it is full of stuff that you don't necessarily, that is wasted space out of.
Great. Is there anything that draws you in? Are there any positives? The boxes, we heard. The consistent titles. Is any of the content drawing you in?
I think it's hard because there's so many things that I'm trying to look at, but it's not that the content's good. Actually, all those pictures, I kind of like them, but they're too small and there's too much stuff.
So if we spend some more time with this, we could figure out what the main message is, and then really think about which images communicate that message, right? What are you trying to get across to the audience? Are you trying to get across, I don't know, alone back crib, no pillows? This is what's jumping out at me. Sid, Suze, I don't know what the difference is. Is that the important part? Like, I don't know what the important part is. And I recently read, and I don't know where, I'm sorry, so that's bad for evidence-based, but when I was preparing for this, I think it might have been in the AMY guide, which is for medical education, that you can, within something like 60 seconds, if you can't tell the main message from a poster, the poster's probably not very effective at communicating. So when you're thinking about your research, what's your main message? Is it the result or is it the research question? Maybe your result wasn't that interesting, but the research question is really important, right? So think about your story. What's the important piece there? Maybe it was your methodology. You tried a methodology that hasn't been tried before and it failed, but that was interesting because now we know that sucks, right? So what's the interesting part that you want to communicate and make sure that we get it right away?
Which in this poster you could do just by adding a few words to the title.
Yeah, because
Totally,
it's hard, it doesn't tell you like what's new about SIDS, which I'm assuming is back to sleep, is the, now having spent a couple minutes looking at it.
Yeah, well, so like, what's that little graphic up there, back to sleep, right? Anyway, again, excellent points. And these are the kinds of things that you're going to be thinking about when you create your own. Here's one more. It's not really, this one's not really research, I don't think. I think it was more just info, yeah. But I picked it because it does give you a sense of how it's, like this one isn't as boxy. It's just set up a little bit differently. And there's some advantage to, if you're going to keep the same categories for your research, which you're going to want to do because they signal to your reader where's the methods, where's the finding, you know, all that. But what do you think of those circly, blobby pictures?
It's hard to read the text.
I think
It's entirely clear to me, like, it's easy to read, like, what the things are and figure out that they, like, relate to living well.
I kind of like them.
It's a much better
Me too.
graphic than the one on the previous poster.
okay, I wonder if the photos, like if the font could be, like similar to that graph that we had before, like if the pictures could be dulled out just a little or faded out just a little and the text was a little bit easier to read.
Or they could have even put the text under in little boxes or something, right? Just clarify it a bit better.
They did do the white with the black outline though, which is like
Helpful?
well, it's like sure I'm pretty sure it's been shown to be like the most easy to read on like pictures or whatever.
Yeah.
Someone told me that at one point, but
Yeah.
so they were thinking about it, but I agree.
Some, but the mind well with the kind of like lighter background stand out as well as like the veggies.
Notice it has a little scanny thing at the bottom?
QR code, yeah.
Yeah.
I have to wonder too, like
Like really-
sometimes, I mean, this is actually really big, 'cause it's on a screen, but sometimes when you look at a poster on a computer screen, it looks really blurry, but if it's actually good quality printout, like if that was size 40 font sitting
Right,
in
it
front
would
of us,
probably
you'd
be
actually
better.
be able to read that no problem.
Yeah, it
So it's kind of depends on.
and keep in
right?
mind again, I've like taken this from wherever and just pasted it in, so if it were, you're right, if it were a poster it would be better. Okay, did you really quickly get the message with this one?
Yeah.
Nice, eh? Isn't it great to have examples at work? Okay, so poster guidelines, we are perilously close to 4 o'clock, so I'm not gonna bother going through that. But I do have a handout, which is kind of a grid to judge posters. And you can judge your own with it, or get your colleague to judge yours. I've really put down pretty much the same things that would have been for a PowerPoint, except it acknowledges what you pointed out, which is the interactivity, they can hop wherever, all that kind of stuff. So I just want to close with putting it all together. Really, your PowerPoint presentation and your poster are the vehicles for your message. So if you're really clear about who your audience is and what your main message is, The rest of the stuff is built around that, and that's where you're gonna be able to have the biggest bang for your buck.